It's a pleasure to be here, and it's even a bigger pleasure that I got one of my best employees. I talked them into being here as well. So I'm really happy that you all stuck around. The last three conferences, I think I've been the last person to go. So I'm always trying to figure out, are they going to sleep or are they leaving? Either way, I'll tell you something about cognitive psychology, because I've been a therapist for a long, long time. People remember the beginning and they remember the end. It's usually the middle part they forget. I'm going to try to give you some memorable moments for this afternoon. Again, I'm so pleased you are here. I've been working in suicide prevention for about 12 years, and you're the reason I'm here. I got up the other day and I thought, gosh, you shouldn't talk about suicide. You really want to talk about suicide? Should you pick something lighter to talk about? But I'm dedicated to the field because, as was discussed earlier, I'm one of an unfortunate community of suicide loss survivors. So 12 years ago, I made a decision I was going to divert my life. Became the clinical director for suicide prevention at the USC Verdugo Suicide Prevention Center, which you just heard about, and then eventually was the director, and Sandra and I got to work together. Nobody more brilliant than Sandra, by the way. Thank you, Sandra, for being here. And she brought in the buildings, which I really appreciate it. We want to really dedicate some time and thank our first responders for being here. We're thinking next year on the 10th anniversary, we're really going to focus on the first responders, physicians, police, fire, EMTs, people who are at the front line who need our support as well. So appreciative that all of you that have made it here today, especially Brisket. Nobody can see Brisket. So if you paid attention this morning, you learned a little bit about research. I spent some time trying to make sure I could cover as much as I could. And you learned, which I listened to very carefully, suicide is not a diagnosis, right? We're looking to treat the mental health issues that make or participate in making someone more vulnerable to suicide. Stan, one of my favorite all-time speakers and friends, talked about need safety. He talked about the most important fact that we have to start looking at how we handle our firearms and how we keep people safe. He also talked about his pain. And he talked about treating the pain, people who are suicidal. You know, we have to remember we're talking about people today. We are talking about an issue that's a really tragic issue, but we're really talking about supporting people. Then we got a good sense of education. What I like most about what Dr. McGraw said is she said we need to find caring adults. We need to find people in school systems that can help take care of the students, the children that need our help. Then we got a firsthand Dorothy, bad to the bone, a fellow survivor, who took over the group that I eventually originally started for suicide loss survivors. One of the things when I became a loss survivor, I was desperate to find help pretty quickly. I went to D.D. Hirsch, and that's how I got connected with them. They were brilliant at meeting me, talking to me, helping me find the support I needed. So I work with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I'm on their board. So a couple of years ago, I said, you know what, there has to be something for people like me when they need something right away. So I did start that group, but Dorothy has grown it beyond what I even dreamed it would be. And then finally listened to one of my favorite people who is so wise. And the fact that Sandra has been working in crisis response for quite a while. I was there 10, 11 years ago, and Sandra was already ahead of the curve thinking, how can we do this better? How can we make sure that we support the people that are in crisis and really get them to the point that they need to be in. So let me talk a little bit about what I want to talk about. In fact, I can figure out how to progress this, or if you want to put it for me. I'm going to talk about listening. This is a really basic concept, but it's really important. I like this quote: listening is an attitude of the heart, a genuine desire to be with another which both attracts and heals. The reality is, I was a therapist for a long time, I think over 30 years. It only took me about 28 to figure out I should just be listening and not trying to provide a solution. That's a little bit of my codependence. Because the reality is, everybody has a sense of what their solution, everybody has where they've been and what they've been through and what they need to get to the next place. So I'm going to talk a little bit about listening, and part of my job, part of every conference is a little research, a little bit about suicide, loss survivors, someone with lived experience, which I'm going to introduce Juan in just a minute, and just a little bit about suicide. So I'm going to talk about the Suicide Prevention Center here, and I don't know if all of you know, but that center was originally began by a couple of veterans. Prior to these guys that you see on that list, There was no such concept as suicide prevention, because the thinking was anybody who was suicidal was going to die by suicide. The reality was, as you heard Stan say, and a couple of people today, it's not people wanting to die, it's people wanting to get out of the pain they're in. These gentlemen studied the suicide loss notes or suicide survivor notes, the people who died by suicide, the suicide notes. And what they found out was there was this concept that they discovered when they were analyzing them called ambivalence. The idea that somebody really didn't want to die, but they were struggling between life and death. What that did for them was realize if people are really studying or trying to survive, what they could do is they could then develop a prevention strategy. Because before then it was thought, you're not going to be able to prevent it. Somebody wants to die, wants to die. If you realize that people are in pain and they want the help, then you design the prevention around that. And that being the first suicide prevention center, which is grown across the country and across the globe. It was in the late 50s and in the early 60s when Marilyn Monroe died. They were called to find out if it was a suicide, to do an autopsy, or a homicide. They said a suicide. What happened next was people, because of the publicity from all across the country, started calling, saying, wait, I have those feelings too. I need that help. And guess who picked up the phone? They were busy doing research, so their wives came for the first suicide prevention counselors. Leave it to that kind of support to get there. So remember, to understand suicide, we have to understand ambivalence. We have to understand it's not people wanting to die, it's people struggling with the desire to stay alive. And they're dealing with that ambivalence between hope and despair, between wanting to die and wanting to stay alive. When you recognize that, that really gives us all the opportunity to figure out how can we help them end that psychic. I'm kidding, so excuse me for continue to that. So data last year, I think 2022 is about the last we had. It was about 49,000 people. Men died 4 times as often as women. We understand more about that now because of the lethal means that men employ. Women actually attempt 4 times more often than men. So we know that firearms and that lethality are dangerous. We also know that veterans, which is why I went from the Suicide Prevention Center to US Vets, make a disproportionate amount of suicides. They make up to 13%, sometimes between 13 and 15%. When I left the Suicide Prevention Center, I was on back to becoming my private practice, but I didn't know about this till I was at the Suicide Prevention Center. And so I realized there was a need of less going forward. And firearms again accounted for 71% of all veteran suicide deaths. So we definitely are talking about that. We talked a little bit today about what makes a person suicidal. I wish we had the answer. You saw even with the research this morning, there's only really 2 medications and they're still trying to figure them out. It's because it's not a single cause. Often we say it was a breakup, it was a psychological crisis they hit, it was a financial issue. Well, there's multiple reasons. But it's a complex interaction, what we call risk and protective factors. And I think you've seen this probably 2 or 3 times. I'm trying to work through this so I can get to the more important part, which is talking to Juan. Risk factors are the increased likelihood. Protective factors are what we can help offset the risk. So what do we need to know? We need to know how to take these risk factors, specifically for many people, but for veterans, mental health. We've already talked about substance abuse. What's the impact of trauma in combat? Trauma, of course, many first responders. I went to a talk once at a natural suicide talk, and a couple of police officers were saying, well, we don't realize about first responders is they're impacted by trauma almost all the time in their job. For the veterans we work with, the ones that are coming out of the military, they're coming out of a situation where they were taken care of, they knew what to do, when to get up, what to wear, they had a job, they had income, they had a place to live and a duty and a purpose. They got out of the military, they had none of that. So we still have veterans, which is what I focus on. I'm one of 11 sites for US Vets, which is the largest nonprofit for homeless veterans. My job is to find the veterans that are coming back now to make sure they don't end up homeless. Because many of the veterans that came back from the Vietnam War and earlier didn't get the help, they didn't address the trauma. In fact, they weren't usually welcome because of the politics of that war. Thus, they ended up on the street in pretty dire straits. So we work on that. Access to firearms, of course, social isolation, if you're taught to take care of yourself, which a lot of people are. These are the protective factors. How do we help them? We look at the other side of that. Providing support, access to mental health, crisis intervention resources, which you heard about, engagement in meaningful activities of what we call purpose. positive coping strategies, how do you deal with that? I think we're still learning about that, but I hope we're bringing that, future planning, education, and more integrated care models. So the last thing I'm going to talk about real quickly before I bring up Juan is what we know about what we need to be on the lookout for. So if we know someone has a high level of risk factor, what I always like to use the analogy is think of suicide as a public health issue because it's a health issue. It's a mental health issue, but it's a health issue. I liken it to heart disease. I have a family history of heart disease. I have high blood pressure, slightly overweight, pandemic didn't help. I have high cholesterol. So what does my doctor do every time I go to the office? He assesses my blood pressure, looks at my blood, looks at my stomach, asks me if I've been exercising, et cetera, right? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes no. Anyway, what he's doing is he's assessing the risk. He knows the risk. So the protective factors are to eat healthy, take care of myself, get the weight down, get on blood pressure medication if I need. Well, if we do the same thing with the population we know that's high risk, first responders, physicians, various communities like veterans, we know that we can look at, we don't have to look at everybody all the time, but we do have to look at more people. And then we have to, once we know the people, we have to look out if they get in trouble and the warning sign is we need to intercede. For me, if we go back to the heart disease, if I had, suddenly, started to get really sweaty and I couldn't breathe and I had some pain, you would know heart issue might be an imminent, or cardiac issue might be imminent. These are warning signs, again, we would watch out. As you heard Stan say earlier, a crisis, when it's a suicidal crisis, is relatively short-lived. So if we find out within 24 to 48 hours how to address the person or get them on the crisis line, we can help them get through the crisis and get help. Briefly, the last thing I'll talk about, which I learned at the Suicide Prevention Center from Sandri, is we need to evaluate risk. Being a suicide loss survivor, I never thought about suicide prior to my loss. Then like Stan, it also became a vocabulary that was going on in my head. Not an active one, but periodically when you think life is tough and I don't like it and I'm stressed, what would suicide be? I never thought I would do it, but it entered my mind. So suicidal thoughts in and of themselves aren't necessarily dangerous. They're associated with mental health conditions. When it gets to desire that I want to, I'm not just thinking about it, it's a little more serious. As you heard earlier, when it gets to capability, now I'm thinking how I want to do it, then it raises the risk. And finally, if it's intent, which is what they measure on the crisis line at the beginning and end of the calls, on scale 1 to 5, how likely are you to act on what you're doing right now? 1 being, no, I'm just thinking about it. 5 being, I don't think I can be safe. Sandri did an excellent job of sharing the fact that most people on the crisis line can be de-escalated. Well, all of you in here, and again, thank you for being here, are those people aside from the crisis line that can work with your colleagues and your friends. I'll tell you one last story and then I'll bring up one. And buffers, of course, are reminding people why they want to stay alive. I was working in a hospital prior to the Suicide Prevention Center. In a conversation, somebody from the Suicide Prevention Center, Sherry actually, was coming out to speak. I was in charge of all the clinicians and the psychologists, the therapists, the social workers. So I sent all of my clinical people to the training that I didn't go to because I was in administration only to lose someone to suicide 6 months later. So I share that not for your empathy or sympathy, but for the fact that we need to become aware that people are right next to us and around us that need our support. And we're the ones that have the information. It's a terrible thing I share for if you ever come in for therapy. Once you have the information, you have the responsibility. So that's what I hope you leave with, is making sure you start that dialogue. Now, the most important part of the conference, I want to bring up, we talked about loss survivors. I want to bring someone with his own lived experience, a man who I'm very proud to be working with, who now heads up the mental health and suicide prevention veteran peer outreach team in the county of Orange. And has taken his combat and his history as a veteran and the pain that was associated with this transition to his active duty and everyday working life. And he's brought his son in here for education as well, which I couldn't be more pleased to welcome him. So please help me welcome Juan Garcia.
Robert?
Yes.
Look at that.
Yeah.
You see that guy up there? That's a first generation Mexican American to get his master's degree, and that's my mother. We worked the fields together, picking strawberry. Here I am giving her my master's degree. I'll look at that picture. So, I guess we could just do a little small breakdown. Thank you so much for the amazing introduction regarding my, operation, Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom. A lot of challenges. I have a total of 8 combat tours. I've had so much to overcome, the resilience, the education, just basically trying to make it through every single day. It was harder and harder. And the easy part was like going on missions, like just getting the task done. But once you get out of the military, it's so hard out here to try to really catch your footing. Law enforcement, first responders. I was having a conversation with a sheriff buddy of mine yesterday, and I was asking about how's your mental health, and he said, "Man, we don't talk about that." It's like, "Are you enrolled in therapy?" No, that's not something that I'm going to do. I do that, and I'm going to get into a lot of trouble, so I just keep that to myself. And like, well, whenever you want to talk to somebody, I'm here for you. We've been talking ever since, every single day, about just little things about like that make them happier. Robert, like. No, you have some questions up on the.
Yeah, well, I figured there were some questions that I wanted to illustrate. Part of the reason to have someone with lived experience who's gone through their own mental health journey. I love being a clinician, but and I'm not a veteran, by the way, but I will tell you, I don't know much about Juan's mental health and his journey. I know a little bit, and I know Juan, I'm privileged to work with him, but I know as a clinician, it's becoming increasingly more important that we listen to people about their mental health journey, so we give them what they want rather than what we think they want. And that's the reason I brought Juan here today. So Juan, I know you had a very difficult transition, and I know I've heard your story a little bit. Would you tell me a little bit about when you knew you were getting into difficulties with your own mental health and what was happening to you at the time? So you give us a little background.
Yeah, so there's a few different attempts, and to me in my head, I guess they weren't attempts, they were just a means to try to end the pain and also maybe get help. I am an initial invasion, so combat veteran. So at that time, there really wasn't that much mental health support, PTSD, all that really didn't exist. And I heard one of the other officers, or somebody else say as well, that just basically just suck it up and drive on. That's literally we have to do, Robert. But my very first one was going to be when I was actually in combat. I was sitting in my bunker, and I remember just everything was blowing up around me, and I was ready to call it quits. I was like, you know what, this is it. Like, I had a few friends that had passed away that day already, and I was like, I have to just, I'm not gonna make it home today. And if I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna go out on my own. But then I had this thought in my head, and I was like, no. There has to be something else to this. There has to be more. So I stopped. I didn't really know that that was an attempt. I just kind of figured that, you know, I was just going to do it on my own and just going to carry on. The second time happened, Robert, when I got home and my life was literally fast-paced in combat. And then everything just slowed down when I got back home. But anything like the slamming of the door or just anything would trigger me, and I started crying and I started freaking out, and I just didn't understand why. I was married at the time, and my ex-wife did not know how to support me, so her thing was like, "Aren't you a man? You're not supposed to be crying. You should know how to deal with this stuff. Aren't you a combat veteran?" And that only made it worse. So there goes my second attempt. I tried jumping from a balcony, and well, the grass was wet on the bottom, and so my feet just went into the mud. So yeah, it was a failed attempt, but I was also a paratrooper, so I also did a PLF and my feet and knees together, and that was just, you know, but in my brain, once again, that was just a cry for help. I told my commander, and they wanted to put me into some of the classes and courses, and I passed them with flying colors because everything had already subsided, and I think I was good to go. The third one was the worst one, and that was the one that was really hard, and that's when I got out of the military. That one was hard because I started to drink heavily. I had lost my marriage, I lost my home, like everything, all my furniture was gone, vehicle was gone, I had no job. And so I started drinking so heavily, and I tried to literally just drink it to the point where I just would be gone. And so I blacked out completely in an empty house with no furniture, no wife, no family, I lost everything. And when I came to, I thought I was dead, but I wasn't. I was just in a dark house by myself. I said, what am I doing? I've been through worse than this. And like, if I can survive that, I need to be able to make it through this. So I stuck it out. And there's a few more, like I said, that were all cries for help. And nobody heard anything. Nobody even believed it. So I just kind of stuck it out, Robert.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Juan. I think, when people are trying to end the pain and to get support and look for it, especially if you're taught you're supposed to, you know, take care of yourself and do it yourself, it's difficult. When you go on a journey like that, and this is about all mental health or suicide, when did you get up to a moment and what did that tell you when you decided, I'm going to start working on recovery? The other thing you said that's important is if someone does have an attempt and they've shared that with you, the reason that's such a pivotal warning sign is because it means they've gotten close to crossing over, which means the desire to die is starting to outweigh the desire to live because of the pain involved. So that's when you really have to pay attention if you do historical information on anybody that's going to have an attempt. But you got to a point that you began to recover. Can you tell me when that was and what happened at that point?
Yeah, so that was a little harder. I at the time I didn't believe in individual therapy. That wasn't a thing for me. Going in and talking to a therapist, sitting down and sharing my feelings and what was going on inside of me, when I didn't even understand what was happening personally, was just not a route that I wanted to take. And then when I did actually go to my appointments, or when I did actually set up mental health appointments, I didn't show up. I was a no-show. I took myself out of it. You know, that just kept on happening over and over again. But things were getting really dark for me. I was starting to have suicidal ideation, like a lot. Those type of moments where you're just driving and you're telling yourself, you should just end it right here. Looking at stuff in the household and just looking at simple ways of how I could basically end my life. That's what basically really triggered, hey, like you need to really start talking to somebody and getting some professional help, because I don't have all the answers. I legit would jump onto Google and was trying to like do research, like if I knew what the heck I was doing. I really didn't. I was just reading other people's views and opinions, and I was going off of that. But there was just a lot of pain happening inside that I really didn't understand. And there was a lot of just thoughts just going and going and going and going. Going from combat to civilian life, it's so much more slower out here. Things are so much more common. Not in Los Angeles, traffic's ridiculous. You know, on the East Coast, North Carolina, when I got up to Fort Bragg, it's slow, it's quiet. People are relaxed. I wasn't used to that. I needed something that was going to make a thrilling day for me, something that was going to push me even further and make my heart rate just shoot up as much as possible in order for me to feel like, wow, I actually did something. So that slowness, that just relaxing feeling, that sitting in silence was not what I was looking for. I needed something that was exhilarating. So that's what pushed you then to then start getting rested, to start driving really fast and doing things that you're not supposed to be doing, and that only causes more danger for yourself and the people around you. And then you start questioning yourself when you're sitting in a cell saying, dude, what am I doing? This isn't me. Those are the moments that made me think, this is not the person that I was supposed to be.
Thanks for sharing. I think, you know, when Sam talked earlier about being someone who's a professional in the field, or someone who's smart and savvy like Juan, and you don't think I would be the one that would want to take my life. But when you get in that much pain and you're in crisis, that does become evident. But also what I hear is the other side, the buffer. I began to remember who I was or think who I was. I don't know if you noticed on the flyer, there's the word hope. We were thinking of a title this year for the conference, and this is what I wanted. I wanted all of us to go out of here. It's a difficult subject, but the idea of hope. You know, what is the call to action? What can I do now? So Juan, I want you to share, I want us to tilt slightly into that time.
Watch this.
By the way, this is why now I understand he works as hard as he does. He works about like the 20 people that's working for me. So tell me, what are some of the strategies that helped you initially go from someone who was had lost everything, was in a lot of pain, was using a substance, which we know is also a comorbidity for suicide, to somebody who started to pick yourself up, driving fast, getting into jail, and now wanting to do, what did you do? Was it the professionals? I don't think it was, but who was it, or how did you start to get to that other path of healing?
surrounding yourself with other like-minded veterans. Somebody else, not just veterans, just people that have gone through what you're going through. People that are going through those challenges. Having a mentor is having somebody that's actually overcome those challenges and just allowing them to guide you. Listening, honestly listening, educating yourself as much as possible. I mean, you're on your phone every single day. It's all there available for you. At my time, it wasn't. We didn't have social media like that. But those are the things that I really did. One of the favorite things that I heard was breathing exercises. Somebody said breathing exercises. I tell my daughter how to do breathing exercises. Whenever she gets emotionally, like whenever I get after her and I discipline her, I tell her, hey, you need to go to timeout. She'll start crying, and then she'll start really crying a lot. And I learned that breathing exercises really calms me down. She'll take a deep breath, exhale, count 1. She'll do that 3 different times, and then she notices that she catches herself. And then that's when I explain to her, you know, Mika, the reason that I put you over here in timeout is because this did this or that. And then she starts to realize, and she's okay, then I'll catch you doing it by yourself. And that's the coolest thing ever. Box breathing really helped me out. Breathing exercises, just different coping mechanisms, but all in totality was really honestly educating myself, getting to know what was going on with me, and then having that access to the education benefits for me. I started off my degree in criminal justice, and then I jumped over into psychology. So I got my bachelor's in psychology, and the interest was like, what's really happening with me? A lot of my research papers that I did, Robert, were really all centered around like just emotions that I was feeling, things that I was trying to just answer. And so I get so dived into like this research where I was like, wow, like I need to see data, I need to see what the back end of it. And then once I went to the USC for my master's degree for social work, that's where the pivot point just went right. And I was like, wow, I can really honestly help other people because if I honestly stop and listen and utilize this for a good purpose.
Thank you. So, you know, one of the things that I think we often forget is that lack of purpose. We have to have somebody to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. So it wasn't really much professional help, but it was kind of some of your own initiative to do the research and study. So we have a room full of now suicide prevention sort of experts that are going to leave here today. And those of you who are clinicians, you have some of those skills, but have I even us clinicians don't have a lot. But what would you tell this whole group that walking out the 1, 2, or 3 things that you want them to know if they're going to talk about suicide or if they think someone's in crisis that you would have preferred someone did or helped you with?
Yeah, the verbiage that you use in a session, acknowledging the fact that every single human being is different, but at the end of the day, they are human beings. I see such a large diversity in this room. And one of the things that I had to do for myself was take away that unconscious bias, but also remove any prior thoughts that I thought that I had of somebody sitting in front of me when I was doing individual therapy with them. Being culturally competent, being competent about not only religion, but also, you know, factors like, I think for if there's any Latinos in the room, my mom always told me whenever I had problems, she said, just have yourself a little sopita and do a little prayer, carry on with your day. No, that isn't therapy. It feels good for the moment, but you know, honestly, at the end of the day, it really doesn't help out. It just helps out, just it's like a blanket over the issue. Being culturally competent, those conversations, allowing the person that you're having therapy with, or the person that you're sitting with, to honestly just speak their emotions, having empathy, and remembering that both of y'all are humans at the end of it. Literally, just be a human being with that person. I was always so worried about having individual therapy with somebody. And I was like, how am I supposed to sit here? Well, go by the book. The book is a good guideline, the DSM-5, but at the end of the day, me actually just being myself and resonating with that person and having those lived experiences and utilizing my lived experiences, what's really helps out. To be able to connect with somebody and help them just overcome those challenges. I'm waiting to tell you about all the good stuff that happened after all this bad stuff, bro.
Okay, I think you can go into the good stuff. So what I heard you say is being able to listen to people, someone who's culturally competent, someone who's willing to get the education, provide the support, but really connect to you. Okay, tell me a little bit about all the good things that happened.
This is very so all those challenges, all those combat tours, a failed divorce, and attempted suicides, enrolling into school, all of that has to come to something positive, right? I adopted 2 children, Jesse. My daughter, roughly 5. My amazing wife. And then of course now I have a beautiful home. I have such a huge connection with my family. My mental health is at the best that it's ever been. I'm so happy. I have a job. That's not even a job. It's literally my passion. Every single day I wake up with this happiness that just comes over my home and my family. To be able to give back to other veterans, to advocate on behalf of mental health, to do trainings and create trainings for suicide awareness, suicide prevention, to do conferences like this and be an advocate, not only for first generation Mexicanos, Latinos, just anybody that has always felt like there's no shine at the end of their tunnel. It's possible, and it feels really freaking good.
Juan had 3 other veterans that he works with, so there's a group of 4 of them down in Orange County. They are everywhere. He is everywhere. He's talked to the mayors. He's met with the governor. He knows more people than I'll ever know. He does more in one day than I'll ever do. He holds 4 large groups, 20 small groups. He has case management, education under him, and he is covering the entire county. For veterans specifically, we hope to do the same thing in LA. There's a veteran bill. I don't know how many of you know Governor Newsom's grandfather was a veteran who died by suicide. So the governor came to CalVet, which is the largest statewide organization, said you need to fix this. CalVet then generated $38 million that they put out for grants. I applied for one, Los Angeles County, Orange County, and then in Inland Empire for $4 million each. I got all 3 of them for our agency. So we'll be done the work. So I what would call this a God move to have Juan come into my life and me in his it's been an incredible education and a privilege to work for Juan, but I want to give him to you for a bit. And thank you, his wife and his daughter and Jesse for being here today to support him. I appreciate that, and I appreciate Juan's transparency because it is about talking about who you are, the good, the bad, sometimes the unfortunate. So anybody have any questions for Juan or for myself about what we do? Please feel free.
Yes.
I had a friend
We're about to get your mic. We're gonna sing together.
I have a friend that she's obviously in depression. And she lost her husband 7 years ago, but still she's not getting out from home. It's a person that was not staying at home before when her husband was alive. And now she is so close that she even doesn't come out to meet us. Is it possible to start a conversation with her, to make her to feel in safe haven and answer to question and open up?
Yeah, so I really like your question because I currently have a family member that's going through the grieving process. You first have to understand the grieving process. It's a really long process and we all deal with it so differently. The second thing is that you have to have patience for that person. The third thing, just be present there for them. Once they start really acknowledging the fact that, you know what, it does feel really good to talk to somebody. You slowly say, hey, let's go outside and let's go for a walk and actually have a talk. And then, hey, let's go to the park. And you can go ahead and engage them like that. And then that re-engages them to actually be able to leave their home. My mother, we lost my, I was raised by my uncle. I lost my uncle and I thought my mom was gonna do the exact same thing. I just finished seeing her this weekend. And wow, she's just out doing everything. But she got back from Europe or something like that. And I was like, what? She goes, yeah, Nico, I just can't. I grieved. It was really hard. But I know that he's in a better place and I still need to also move on as well. We gave her that time. We allowed her that grieving process and we were always there for her. So just be patient. Be patient, but be there with her. And start off with some teas or coffees in the morning every single day if you want. or every Friday. Yeah, absolutely.
I would share too, and I think we've heard this over and over again, and I have found this a pivotal point in my career, is build a relationship, build a relationship, build a relationship. If I'm gonna trust you enough to talk about my mental health, I wanna know that you're okay to listen to my mental health. When I was a clinical director at the Suicide Prevention Center, I worked with people who are pretty fresh out of the hospital who had survived an attempt. Some of them pretty gruesome attempts, and some of them still wanting to die. So I was trying to figure out why am I gonna do this and how am I gonna help these people? But what I had to do is I had to learn to make it okay for them to talk about the reason they wanted to die, or the fact that they wanted to die. I had to listen and listen and listen, not try to fix it, not try to tell them not to tell me that, not to run home scared because it was a little frightening, but to listen and gradually I developed a relationship. You know what happens if you give people permission to talk about their pain? The pain, as you heard just a moment ago, starts to be externalized and it starts to dissipate. And usually what comes up after the reasons I want to die is the reasons I'm still alive. And then you listen closely to those and you remind them. But the biggest relief is we don't have to have that answer. We just have to have the ability to sit there. I don't know if Stannis said sit in, or Dorothy said sit in mud with them. It's kind of like that. And that took me a long time at the Suicide Prevention Center to go through the volunteer training and really learn to do that. And it was difficult, even after that, to ask friends or talk about it. But building the relationship and knowing them well enough has helped me to establish that before.
I agree.
Other questions?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Darren. I'm here on behalf of LA Mental Health of San Dimas. We're a proud sponsor of today's event. Juan, earlier in your story, you mentioned you reached out to a friend of yours who was a sheriff, and he was hesitant to seek out mental health. And he actually used a phrase of like, just talk about the keep driving. Well, why is it? Why is there a hesitation in the military or in the police force or the stigma associated with seeking out mental health?
If you're a mental health provider, oh, that's very good. So if you're a mental health provider, that is one of the biggest stigmas and challenges that we have, is that negative stigma or that negative cloud that overshadows accessing mental health. In the military, just seem weak. We need you. Your body. You're a body that needs to be performing a duty, and you need to stay busy. And so anything other than that, your emotions, whatever you got going on, you need to set that off to the side, because the moment that you clock in, I think I've heard people say this before, you leave your feelings and your problems at the door. That needs to be let go. Because that's exactly what happens in the military. Especially if you're in the military or if you're law enforcement, you're held at a higher standard. You're supposed to be able to emotionally regulate and set that off to the side, clock in, and then go into like this whole different persona where then now you're doing a duty, and that's what's expected of you. I still haven't overcame that challenge. I still have to navigate that regardless. I may have something that's happening at the house, with my son wanting to wear shorts and I wanting to wear pants. But I get to work and I have to set that off to the side, where any stresses or anxiety, you don't really ever overcome that. Just learn how to kind of sort of regulate it. I wish I had the answer for that. I don't think there's ever really gonna be an answer. Do you think you have an answer for that, Robert? Because for me, it was pretty complicated.
Well, I think it is for most people, but I think especially for men, whether you're military or first responders, I think we were taught very early on not to reach out for help. And the stigma still exists, which we all know. Mental health is a health condition. It's a health condition, a physical and a mental health condition. And we keep forgetting that and think of it as something that's weak, immoral. It's not weak to have heart disease, diabetes, cancer. It's something that happens. We know now that the research shows there are some people that just neurologically are predisposed for a certain mental health condition, and some of those mental health conditions are associated with suicide. Yet we treat them like they're weak or less than. That is so well communicated that we have all that internalized. So you have to push beyond that. We put therapists in 8 community college campuses here in LA County and in 8 in Orange County. We put them right in the veteran resource centers because we know people wouldn't come to us. We had to go to them, and we had to make the access so easy that all they could do. And we have heard people tell us it has saved their lives because they could do the therapy between their classes, and the people were right there, and oftentimes they were veterans. Do we have much time, or are we at 4 minutes?
We do have a few questions online if you'd like to address.
Do it.
First off, thank you for sharing your experience as you have experienced many SI thoughts. Have you battled your triggers? If you still have SI thoughts now that you have overcome the past.
Those SI thoughts, suicidal ideation. What I should do right now? I take that second to like really ground myself, just pause and to appreciate the moment. I've gotten really good at that, of just kind of stepping away and just appreciating what's going on there. I think my wife has caught me sometimes, like staring off to the backyard in just silence. And then she's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? That's my moment to just like really just be appreciative of what I have and that I'm actually still here. They are hard. You do catch triggers, but you have to train yourself and teach yourself, just like you learn how to breathe. You do without even thinking about it. It ends up happening because you do repetitively over and over again. So it's just practice. Practice makes perfect.
Question. I lost a loved one who was a pharmacist to suicide. I've heard that suicide is fairly common among pharmacists, even though they're not often recognized in the same category as veterans or other first responders, such as paramedics, EMTs, doctors, police officers, and firefighters. Is that something that you or any organization are doing anything about?
I hadn't heard about that, so that's I like that. Thank you for that, but I'm gonna leave that to you, Robert.
Sure, I'll share. I think, we tend to regulate or put mental health issues and stress and trauma to certain segments and marginalized groups in our culture. And as was mentioned earlier, a lot of us have gone through trauma, myself included. And there is trauma associated outside of some of what we would think are the normally stressful positions. If you think about it, a pharmacist, like other physicians, has someone's life in their hands. They've got to make sure they're precise, exact. And the stress level of missing or making mistakes is intense. I don't expect to know all about that, but I do know I work with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which is part of the reason I asked them to help co-support this project, because the chief medical officer, who's from San Diego originally, where the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is launching major efforts into helping physicians across the country. It's one of their initiatives and one that we'll continue to do. And we are looking at next year, as we get to celebrate the 10-year of this, really including more information for first responders and really making everybody aware. These are the people that save our lives, that take care of us, and it's time we, flip around and do the same. So I believe it's probably this, the stress associated. Even though it doesn't look like, we had a Navy diver who never was in combat, yet came to work with me. I heard him when he was being interviewed for a job to work in our employment program. I said, I walked around the corner, grabbed the employment man, I said, we need this guy, hire him. So we hired him. He was exceptional, 2 master's degree, a leader in the military, in the Navy, who had lost his best friend to suicide. And who I would later find out when I was doing a suicide prevention conference was dealing with his own suicidal ideation. He wasn't in combat, but those dives were very stressful, and they had changed his life and his ability to cope. And as he worked with us, I saw him get better. And as his first child came around, he not only got better, he got a better paying job. So I knew I was successful.
We have time for one more question from the audience? Okay.
I said, y'all ask away.
Run the gauntlet here.
Hey. American Warrior.
First, I'd like to thank you for your service. Thank you for your honesty. Sorry. I admire your strength. Your lifestyle at the expense of you helping keep us safe. you have so much enthusiasm, so much passion, so much love. And that I could tell you lived your family, they lived you. And I've worked with veterans before. I used to work with seniors, and so many of my veterans were kind enough to share their stories with me, not having ever served myself. I always felt as an outsider. I always analyzed as a coping mechanism. And I always felt it was that missing link. What's missing after your service? Because you're taken apart as a human to join this greater consciousness, collectiveness in the armed services. But then when you come back, how do you put your life together again? I've always felt that even though there's veteran service, you're left alone. Excuse me.
We're with you. We're here with you.
Thank you, but I think the job you're doing now is that missing link. So thank you for your service, thank you for the job you're doing now, thank you. And I'm happy that you're here.
I don't think we can top that.
Thank you for that, I appreciate that.
All right.
I think we're done, so I just want to thank you again. I've got the privilege to work with these fine people here at USC. I appreciate the opportunity and the fact that you all took advantage of that. And I hope you were able to lead us, Dr. Feldman, begins to wrap it up and say goodbye with some hope in your heart.